I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
In 1939, Britain declared war on Germany for the second time in just over 25 years. This was the start of World War II, and much of the population of Britain was called upon to fight or help with the war effort. Aelwyn Matthews was born on March 7, 1925, in Llanelli, Wales. In 1941, just as soon as he was able to, Aelwyn, aged 16, joined the RAF. His goal was to become a pilot, and the first step was to go to school. Aelwyn went to the RAF Apprentice School in Buckinghamshire, England. There, he was trained to fix and fly the planes used by the RAF, including Spitfires and Typhoons. In 1942, Aelwyn was sent to the RAF base in Northolt, just outside of London. For the next 2 years, he moved around from base to base until he ended up in the RAF base in Herne. Meanwhile, Britain was experiencing the Blitz, the German bombardment of Britain, and especially London. The idea was to weaken Britain as much as possible through strategic bombing by air.
When I did a weekend off, and I went to see my sister, who was living outside London, and I hadn't had a change of clothing or anything at all for a few days, and then they all went out to a party and I wouldn't go. I was so tired. I went to bed, and then after I got down I was sleeping fast because I was so tired that my sister came back from the tavern that they were in and tried to get me to come out. I would not leave the room. I stayed in the bed. And so she wouldn't wait any longer because the noise of the bombs going off was bad. So I went fast asleep again, and back she came up again and tried to get me to get up. I wouldn't do it. And I slept all night. In the morning, I looked outside, and there was hardly a brick standing outside, except for the tavern. That was solved, and it looked after itself. But, I mean, all the land around it had been bombed right out of things.
While Aelwyn was at Herne, the D-Day invasion of France was launched. On June 6, 1944, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, opening up a second front in the war against Germany and attempting to free France of German occupation. Aelwyn soon followed the troops who had gone over that day.
But when D-Day came, 3 guys of us, I was one of them, was called to the headman's office, and he told us that we were going to go to France the next day, and that they would need us there because we were the mechanics and things to keep the things going. And he said, but you are all been signed to go to America to do aircrew training. So I hope you'll stay, he says. So the 3 of us said, okay, we'll stay. Because they told us that if we didn't stay, we would be in America, away from the war, and would never get back into the war, because by that time I just thought that they had finished the war with them. As being a young man, I wanted to be in it. Stupid. But they hadn't. So we stayed, and that was my downfall. If I hadn't stayed there, I wouldn't have had all the illnesses I had.
Now that he had agreed to stay and go to France, the next day he was packed up and shipped to France, to a station in Plumtot. The war hit him as soon as he arrived.
No, we flew over. We had the planes. We flew over. And when we landed in France, as soon as the plane put its wheels down, a shell landed, a few feet away. So the pilot said, all of you get ready to jump out, he says. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to slow down, and you can jump out. That's what we had to do. And then we all jumped out safely, and then they were waiting for us there. So we were told to dig our trenches, and then to put a tent up around it, and that's what we had to live in.
Aelwyn's unit continued to move around France, following the front line, surfacing the planes for the pilots.
And then within a day or two, the unit moved on closer to the front line. So we went on to follow them and things like that. One of the pilots had found a German car for small ones. So we had to drive that thing home for him. After the whole thing, we almost got lost. Because we didn't know they had gone on ahead of us. And we came to a town, and I stopped the car, and I went over to a boy about 10, 12-year-old. And I said, have you seen Americans, British cars, lorries going by? He said, in very good English, he says, yes, they went down that way, he says, and you'll meet up with them. I said, we did it. Got there, and then we put up all the tents and all the things again, got the things ready to carry on with the war, and that's how it was.
Unfortunately, as the war progressed and his unit continued on, Aelwyn became sick in his lungs.
When I got so ill I couldn't stand, and I was taken by car to a house that we had taken over, and he said, well, what's the matter with you? I said, well, I got water on the lungs. That's what I didn't know the proper term as well. So he listened to me, dashed out of the room, came back with about 2 or 3 other young doctors who were probably just started. They all had a stethoscope, they were all listening to them and that. It turned out to be I had, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it now. It was a bad thing about the lungs anyway. That's what started it off. I couldn't go far on it because I was too sick. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't do anything. That was it. There was no excitement there for me. I was too weak. I ended up in about 3 or 4 different hospitals. Ended up in the capital city and flown back to England, and that's where I stayed. I was out of the war.
In 1945, as the war in Europe was ending, Aelwyn was back home in Britain, recovering and recuperating from his illness. However, since the illness had cost him a lung, he could no longer be a pilot, and he was medically discharged from the RAF. Instead, he became a teacher, and after a while he met his wife through one of his friends from the war. They were married in 1949, and together with his sister and her husband, an American GI she met through the war, they immigrated to Illinois, where Aelwyn lives now.